us
Okay,
shooting the breeze.
It's recording as well.
Okay, good. I gotta pull up the live feed. Although,
Oh, yeah.
that's fine. Let's see.
Your notes say overview, but where's the underview?
Make sure that it's underview.
I want to get underview. Do you think this is too distracting?
No, not at all.
Yeah, this is probably less
It's
distracting.
nice and dainty.
It is dainty. I've got my
Well,
coffee,
you
you've got your
sure
water,
got it.
and Dale's got his coffee, so you're just missing out this morning. Oh, there we are. Hi, everybody. Got so far one person, so here we go. Not yet, we're not ready yet, but we're getting there. I'm going to actually switch back and forth a little bit today.
Between what? Oh, do you have stuff pulled up?
Yeah, hopefully. Hopefully I do.
You did print him off one?
Of his own notes?
Print me off one, but not him.
Well, he's got it right there in his pad.
I'm
The
good.
paper.
Oh, that's right.
I'm good.
See how that's a yellow piece of paper and that's a yellow piece of paper?
Yeah, I just thought maybe you did it in color.
What time are we? Are we at 10 o'clock yet? Not quite.
1 minute.
Another minute? A whole more minute. What was that?
Mickey Mouse.
Watch.
Mickey Mouse saying,
Is that gonna
did that say
happen, like-
9:59?
It's disturbing.
In the morning it says, you hit it the first time it says, it's 6 a.m. Good morning, pal.
Wow.
Well, for those of you who are already joining us, even though you can't see our faces, we'll be starting in just a moment. We're just letting people kind of get checked in, and we'll start in a minute. Hang on yet, let's, and this way we can look over our notes for another minute.
Yeah, exactly.
And it gives us time for the medications to set in.
Medications.
Or wear off.
There are a
depending.
couple of those that we need, yeah, medications. Let's see. I have lots of notes here.
I see that.
Yeah, are you a little afraid? Be afraid.
I'm
Be
just
very...
glad you can read your handwriting.
You couldn't read my handwriting? Barely.
No.
I read every third word.
Every third word. Oh wow, that's
I
impressive.
think I could just.
I think the more impressive part is that you counted every third word when it would be just
Yeah,
as fast
true.
to read it, actually.
Circle.
Speed read it. Right?
Speed read it, that's
Skip
right.
right over it.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead. Let's begin. Hello, everybody. Thank you,
morning.
Joe. Joe has been with us, getting us prepped and ready to go. We had Gary also here, but he is off and running too. So thanks again, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
God bless.
Have a good day.
So let's even start again with a prayer, and then we'll get around to things. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Lord, as we come for this session this morning of evangelizing with joy and truth and coffee and donuts, we recognize the many gifts that you have given to us, Lord, even the gifts of who we are. We ask you to confirm us in that gift, to help us to recognize the great gift that you have given to us, even in the gift of our very selves, and of the love that you have showed to us, even as we receive the greatness of that gift. May we always be open to your grace, especially in this time here together this morning, opening our hearts and our minds and our souls to you so that you can move us in accordance with your holy will. We ask this through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So, as you can see, we're in a different place.
Yeah.
It's a little different here.
We got run out of
We
the
got-
old place.
Yeah, we got
There's a lot going on campus today.
There's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Everywhere we went,
Yeah.
actually. We got to
Can't be
find
outside.
this-
Yeah.
Couldn't be outside. Yeah, they're doing groundwork outside. There's a retreat for those who are going through RCIA and the Spanish program. That retreat is going on indoors in the narthex of the church. In the church itself, they're getting ready for Palm Sunday, so that's happening. And then there's a group meeting upstairs also where we were going to meet. So there's a lot going on in the life of the parish. But we're here with you nonetheless, evangelizing with joy and truth.
And water.
No, not water.
Somebody has no water.
What is it? It's
Oh, you got water. Okay.
it's
Coffee,
and
donut,
donut. We still got the one
and
donut.
super chicken.
Super. The next time that we gather, actually, we'll be able to have donuts.
Yes.
You can eat that one.
Yeah, and coffee
Good
with
luck.
actual like
Cream.
cream in it that tastes good.
Good luck trying to bite through that 8 layers of lacquer.
Yeah. Well, the chicken is sort of taking care of that too. The chicken is
Yeah.
taking care of the donut for sure.
There you go.
So, we should begin with introductions, I suppose, again, right? So, who are you?
Yeah, you're pointing at me. I'm
Yeah,
assuming. Okay. Yeah. I'm Dale Garrett. I'm the chair of the parish council here at St. Brendan's, and I am looking forward to speaking with you today about this very pressing issue.
Yeah. Yeah. The Equality Act, which is what we're getting into today in particular. It is a very pressing issue in our world today, and it's waiting to go before the Senate even, right? But we'll get to that.
I'm Mary Sims, and I direct.
How do you spell that last name?
Yeah.
Oh yes, that's important. Dale misspelled my name
My jacket's
yesterday
wrong.
on his jacket. Sims with one M, folks. Mary also with one M.
Let's make sure that people don't get scandalized here though either. Dale didn't actually put her name on his jacket either. It just happens to be that his coat says
It's a fishing jacket.
Sims. There you go.
Made by
Very
Sims.
I was offended anyway.
Make sure.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Oh man. Okay, and I'm Father Wickert. I'm the pastor here at St. Brendan. So welcome everybody. And as I said, we're going to talk. Did you talk about what you do besides your name?
No, my name is all I got.
Oh, so why don't you continue with
I'm a
that?
music director, and I direct the RCA program as well.
And a music director, not just in the parish, but in the school.
Yes,
And
that's true.
Also teach religion in the
Yes.
school. Yeah. So, very good. We're here again.
Beauty and truth.
Yeah, that's right. Beauty and truth and goodness. Yeah,
Strive for that.
that's right. So, we're going to talk, as I said, about the Equality Act, which has already passed the House, right? Actually, noticing that in 2019 it actually passed the House by a greater margin than it did this time, which is interesting. And is now before the Senate. It's actually the cause of the big stir, right, in terms of even the trying to get rid of the filibuster. So it's one of the reasons why they're trying to get rid of the filibuster within the Senate, so that then they can just move straight to a vote on it in the Senate as opposed to the filibuster. So it's interesting, that dynamic that's happening also. But the Equality Act is what's before the Senate, and it's important for us as Catholics also to understand how that affects us, because again, there's times where people say that we shouldn't get involved in politics. First of all, the church has a lot to say about politics, especially in the way that it impacts our lives, the values of our lives, but especially in the way that politics seek to impact the church, and even to supplant the voice of the church sometimes, which is what's part of what the Equality Act is about too. But yeah, but I want to start it off. I don't know if you guys had anything to add to that. Dale, you look like you had something.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add to that was that we're here to talk about mostly, I think, the impact of the church,
Right.
but in a broader scale, I think it's the impact on society in general, which we'll talk about, and how it's going to impact not just Catholics, but also all kinds of venues. So it's a very interesting bill that I don't think people realize how serious an issue this is.
Yeah. And the name is really a misnomer also.
Very much so.
Yeah.
It's more like the Inequality Act,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, so we want to start though, because the Equality Act especially is seeking to include things around sex, sexual orientation, and transgender issues. And so I think it's important that we root all of what we're going to talk about in the love of God, which all of the moral realm from the perspective of the church is guided by that love of God. And so we want to place it in that, everything that we're going to say today in that context. And so I'm going to walk through some things before we really dig into the topic. The program today is going to be a bit longer. It was the last time that we gathered also, and we seem to be hitting in the midst of these big issues, these big topics that are coming around right now. But regardless, it's important for us to set it in love. So I want to say hello to the different people who have said hello to online. So it looks like Jennifer and Maxine and Marion all have said hello also. I don't know who else might be on there. There's a number of people, but those are the ones who have said hello. So hello to all of you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Maybe
That's
they
right.
have coffee.
Yeah, maybe they have coffee. Well, Gail and I have coffee too. Tastes delicious.
You have your Gibbs coffee over there.
I do have mine. If anybody knows what Gibbs coffee is, you know what that means. Otherwise, you'll have to catch on. It's an inside joke.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, whenever we're talking in the church about things around same-sex attraction or transgender, right? It's important that we focus on the respect that we have for people, the love that we have for people, and the dignity with which everyone is created, as we're all created in the image and likeness of God. And that's actually what the title even of today is, right? God's image and likeness. Because God's given us that dignity, and then it's for us to live into that dignity, that gift that He's given to us. So here I looked up respect again in the dictionary. I do this every once in a while,
Yeah.
right? I do that with homilies sometimes, but realize the struggle, it's part of the definition, what it said anyway, is realizing the struggle that all people have, and then also from the church's perspective, but also the call to live into godly love and dignity. And what does it mean even to love, right? Which is a word that is thrown around a lot in our world today. And even the dictionary gives a far different definition of what the word love is, as I looked that up also, than what the church gives to it. Part of the dictionary had this in it, but it was pretty far down the line, right? But love, from the church's perspective, and this is the definition that was given in the dictionary down the line: having one's best interest and well-being as a priority in your life, which is very close to the definition that the church gives. Bishop Barron would say the best definition that he's heard of love is willing the good of the other.
That's Thomas
as
Aquinas,
other. Is
yeah.
it Thomas Aquinas? So Bishop, I didn't know that Thomas Aquinas actually said that, I should. But Bishop Barron is obviously a huge fan also of Thomas Aquinas, so everything that he does really in many ways is based out of St. Thomas's theology and philosophy for that matter. But willing the good of the other as other. And I thought of, when I was thinking about that also, I was thinking what Jesus' words are: why do you call me good? Only God alone is good. So from God we receive every source of goodness. It's Him who also teaches us what goodness is. And anything that we do or try to, or even buy into, that we think of as being good, that's contrary to the goodness of God, really is exactly that. It's contrary to goodness itself. And so living into that goodness that God has given to us. And that's how we can truly respect someone and love someone, also understanding one's dignity that they've been given first and foremost by God. Again, being created in His image and likeness.
Agape love.
Agape love, yeah, godly kind of love, right? Which, again, that's even what we hear about in Genesis. God created mankind, and this is from Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. God created mankind in His image. In the image of God He created them. Male and female He created them. And it adds in Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, after speaking about the creation of man, also, that is why man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two become one flesh, which Jesus also re-emphasizes in Matthew chapter 19, verse 5, right? So Jesus re-emphasizing as they ask him about, well, Moses granted us even the opportunity to write a bill of divorce, right, for our wives. And Jesus says, only because of your obstinacy of heart did Moses allow this, but from the beginning it was not so. And then he makes that quote from Genesis, from the beginning, right? This is how he created us, so that then the man may leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two become one flesh. So that's how God created us from the beginning, even to be, again, a gift to ourselves, but also a gift to others. And we have to get over, in particular, that hardness of our own hearts, which says something contrary to that, right? So again, even as the Jewish people are questioning Jesus, the authorities are questioning Jesus, so the world questions the message of the gospel today, right? Well, Moses allowed this, or the world in some places might be allowing this, or even some people within the church might be saying we should allow this or that, right, when it comes to same-sex unions or transgender. But the church actually proclaims again the same message over and over that Jesus proclaimed to us, male and female he created them, and from the beginning that's why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two become one flesh, right?
I think it also can be referred to as unselfish love.
Yeah.
You know, because it's there's a lot of selfish love going around right now, where it's all about me and what I want.
Well, that's a big catchphrase, self-love.
Yeah, and not worried about anyone else. There's the difference between agape love and
A human kind of love that can be self-centered. Yeah.
Selfish love.
Yeah. Yeah.
You need to always care about the other person and how this is going to affect them.
Right.
It isn't just one-sided.
No. Yeah. And that's all the message of the church is about also, is authentically loving someone, right? To help them again recognize the dignity with which they've been created, and to live into that dignity, again to receive the gift that they've received even in their bodies, right, from God. And John Paul II, of course, speaks about that very powerfully in the theology of the body, that gift of our body and the gift to the world that we are, even through this gift of our body, and recognizing that also, right? So an authentic love also means to love someone, to love God first and foremost, right? So we hear that also. Jesus says, here's the first commandment, to love the Lord your God with all of your mind, heart, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. But notice that there's loving the self and loving the neighbor as we love God. I meant to read this also from 1 Corinthians, speaking about love. Because it's that famous chapter, right, on love, but it speaks to even our world today and the ways in which at times we've carried away from that kind of love. So this is what St. Paul says to us in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Love is patient. Love is kind. It is not jealous. It is not pompous. It is not inflated. It is not rude. It does not seek its own interests, which is what you were saying also, Dale. It is not quick-tempered. It does not brood over injury. It does not rejoice over wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. That's, again, we've even lost that sense of the truth, right? And we've given ourselves over even to things that are contrary to the truth, which is wrongdoing at times, and even sought to condone that. But love does not rejoice over wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth that God again has given to us. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. If there are prophecies, they will be brought to nothing. If tongues, they will cease. If knowledge, it will be brought to nothing. For we know partially, and we prophesy partially. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. To recognize that in ourselves also in this world, right? We know partially, we love partially. How do we come to that fullness of knowledge and of love? Well, ultimately, it's in the next life, right? But we can come to know it because God's revealed what that means to us also in the scriptures and through the church. When I was a child, I used to talk as a child, think as a child, reason as a child. When I became a man, I put aside childish things. At present we see indistinctly as in a mirror, but then face to face. At present I know partially, then I shall know fully, as I am fully known. So faith, hope, and love remain, these three. But the greatest of these is love. God is love, and we hear that constantly, and it's precisely who He is. But He also doesn't call us to rejoice over wrongdoing, right? But to rejoice in the truth, which He Himself has given to us. And He promised that that would be the case, that He would send us the Holy Spirit, guys, in all truth.
That's a very good point, because a lot of people think that because you are a religious person or you're a Catholic, that you're called to love everybody with just open arms and let them do whatever they want to do. Jesus was no wimp. I mean, look at what He did in the temple.
Yeah.
You know, look at his confrontations he had with the Pharisees and the scribes.
Right.
I mean, he defended what was right.
Right.
And it was, people, well, you said that, you talked about that not too long ago on a sermon about people are, walked around in his robe and sandals and, peace and love and all the rest of it. Well, no, he came to teach,
Yeah.
and he defended exactly what God sent him to do.
Right. And even and people often will use that, right, and say, well, Jesus just loves us where we are. That's true. Jesus does love us where we are, but think about also the woman who's caught in adultery, right?
Yeah.
And He tells those people who are gathered around, ready with stones, right, to throw at her, and He says, He's just bent down, drawing in the sand, right, doing His thing, and they're, this is what Moses prescribed to us again, right? So they're pointing that out again, and Jesus says, well, let you who is without sin cast the first stone. They all put their stones down and walk away. Jesus alone is there because He's God and He hasn't sinned, right? So He's not going anywhere. And the woman then is still there with Him, and He says, has no one condemned you, woman? Then neither do I condemn you. But now, go and sin no more, right? So He meets us where we are and loves us even where we are. But then He calls us to that place of conversion. Now go and sin no more.
Well, I think He called them out too, because being God, he could read their minds,
Yeah.
and what they're doing. But He also knew that the death penalty was illegal under the Romans. They weren't allowed to commit murder or execute anyone.
Right.
And He knew that.
Yeah.
And so but He didn't stop them from doing that. He just called on their own conscience to say, let's do what's right here, is what it amounts to.
Right.
He didn't invoke the Romans or anything, but they knew perfectly well they couldn't execute this woman.
Yeah.
Even though Moses' law claimed that they could, but they would be in serious trouble if they did.
Yeah.
So, but He knew that.
Right? So, the first of the commandments I mentioned also already, right? To love the Lord your God with all of, and this is what it is from Matthew chapter 22, verses 37 to 40. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and with all of your mind. And the second commandment is like it, He says, to love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments, He says, depend all of the law and the prophets. And so we put God first. That's an authentic love when we live our lives in accord with those 10 commandments that God has given to us also, and receiving even again ourselves as a gift from God, to love your neighbor as yourself, which means that we're called to love ourselves. But how many of us completely love ourselves? Any of us here?
Yeah.
Right?
No comment.
It's true about all of us,
Yeah.
right? And so to think about that, even in the sense of someone who does struggle with gender dysphoria, right?
Yeah.
For example, there's a part of themselves that they're not loving, but God calls us to love ourselves, right? Even as a gift from Him. And so to come to a place of love for ourselves is a lifelong struggle, really, even given as that gift that we are, right? So it's not anything, in some ways it's a different kind of struggle perhaps that's there, but it's nothing more in some ways that anybody else struggles with. I don't love my nose the way that it is, when I look to the side, it's pretty big, right? There's all kinds of things that we don't necessarily
I
love
feel the
about
same way about my
ourselves.
nose.
There you go.
I feel the same way about your nose. But you know, I guess, Father, back to what we said though, gender dysphoria though is probably a little more serious
Sure,
than that.
it
I mean,
is.
mentally and
Absolutely,
physically, they're just,
There's
just
nothing like
unhappy.
that.
But we're called to love those people.
Absolutely.
They're and to help them find their way, because
Yeah.
you know they I think we saw that in that video where they said, you know, they're willing to just pump their bodies full of all kinds of hormones and everything, trying to become what they feel they need to be,
Right.
only to get to the end and find out that's not good. Didn't do anything for them.
Right,
Made them more unhappy because it didn't work.
right.
So it's more of a, how do we help them be happy with
The gift
what
that
God
they are.
gave them?
Right,
You know,
exactly.
it's not an easy thing, because like you said, we all have our issues about what we're happy with and not happy with.
Yeah.
So,
And, yeah, part of that with us also is that concupiscence, that natural tendency towards sin that we all have, right? And so then we tend to fall into those sins, and then we think of ourselves in some ways as John Paul II said, we're not the sum total of our faults and failings, right? We're the sum total of God's love for us. That's who we are. And so to realize that, so not to just see, well, look at how faulted I am in this area, or how my body looks in this area, and I don't like it, and so I want to change something about my nose, or whatever it is, or I want more hair, right, Lord?
it doesn't work, Father. You can ask all you want.
Yeah.
And you could just look in the mirror and be unhappy.
We can just shave Mary's hair and then glue it
Oh, there we
on.
go,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a good idea.
And we could be Huey, Louie, and Dewey.
What? I think it's time to hook the chicken with that.
Well, I was just gonna say though, that
What is in your
when you're
mouth?
talking about people being unhappy with their sex, I think, just as a little heads up, Mary's gonna touch on that a little bit when she speaks about one of the sections of the Equality Act, so,
We'll get to that.
yeah, we'll get to it.
Yeah. So we're coming up on that, but I wanted to set all of this in the correct context also, right? So that's why we're kind of walking through this, so that people understand, because people think, I think on the outside, perhaps especially looking into the Catholic Church, oh, look at the hatred that's there for a person who struggles with same-sex attraction or with gender dysphoria. No, actually, we're seeking to love them, and to love them in an authentic way also, and to help them grow in that love even for themselves, which God calls us to have, right? So we're created as we are for a reason. God's given us that creation of ourselves even as a gift, not only to ourselves, but also to others. And then it's a call to live into that, right? Yeah, which is not an easy thing. But that's why we're given the graces that we're given, right? So think about the discussion between Jesus and the apostles there also. So if this is the one who can be saved, about speaking with the rich man, and he goes away because he has many possessions and he doesn't want to let go of them. And if this is the case, then who can be saved? And Jesus says, well, for men it's impossible, but for God all things are possible. So in God we can overcome any obstacle that's there in our lives, any sense of even dysphoria, right, that we have about ourselves, or a lack of love that we might have for ourselves. We can overcome that also as we grow in that relationship with the Lord, see ourselves even as that gift that God has given to us. But unfortunately in the world also, God has an enemy, right?
And he's working overtime.
The enemy is the devil, and the devil desires even to divorce ourselves from that gift of ourself. And our society has bought into that, right? And so that's where we're seeing the society push this separation even of from whom you were created to be, and to go just wherever direction, as you were saying earlier, Dale, to do whatever we want, whenever we want, right?
It always reminds me of this, I don't know if you've ever read, well, I'm sure you have, the Screw Tape Letters.
Yep.
Where the senior devil was talking to Wormwood, the junior devil, and he was the junior devil was trying all kinds of things to take man down.
Yeah.
Nothing would work. And then the senior devil says, you're doing it wrong. Because your whole job is just create enough noise so man cannot hear his own God. And sometimes I wonder, with all this stuff going on, with all the technology and all the rest of it, it's I think I told you the drive-by postings that people put on there, just attack postings people put on online. It's not genuine conversation anymore.
Right.
And there's a whole lot of that. There's a whole lot of noise, and so it makes it hard for people to hear him.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, he's successful that way.
Right. Yeah, so many distractions for sure.
Yeah.
Which I think, again, with the Exodus and Fiat groups, right, they've been working through those separation from those distractions, those attachments that we have, so that we can be free to be filled with God, right? Which is what I was talking about also in terms of St. Teresa of Avila when we went through that adult education series with her, and making space in our lives even for God.
Most people will never experience that when like some of the Exodus things where maybe they'd be 3 weeks long or a month long, and they said there's no TV, there's no radio, there's nothing, and it's quiet.
Right.
And the guys are in their cars, and at first they just don't know what to do with themselves.
Right.
And then after about a week, they're saying, I really like this. You know, it gives me time to think, and just, he says, not all these distractions, it makes a huge difference.
It does.
Lower stress levels.
Yeah.
It's amazing what that does for you.
Yeah, and the way that guys fall in love with the prayer life of it also, right, that have been giving themselves over to that, it's incredible to see.
I'm still doing it, a year and a half later.
Yeah, that's right.
Another year to go.
Is
But I
that
do
all?
think there is a
April
duty
22nd.
that we have to be aware of what is happening in the world, whether it's
Sure.
cultural or
Sure.
political, and
Yeah.
that we're kind of maybe not aware of every detail and every, like, you know,
Yeah.
torrid scandal that's happened, but what's going on in our world,
In the
and
world,
not
but
keeping
not
our
of the
heads
world.
in the sand.
Right,
you know,
exactly,
ignorant
yeah.
of it.
And too much detail sometimes.
Yeah.
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 Which all of us can get caught into. But yeah, it's living in the world, but not of the world.
Right.
There you
Yeah,
go.
that's the difference.
I mean, you have to know, especially for parents, like what children are being exposed to, you know, if they're in schools and. you know,
Yeah,
all-
absolutely. And I think saying that, parents, here's a side note, parents, it's a good idea when you have kids, check their history, right? Online history. You have every right to do that as their parents. And it's an important thing to do because you need to know what your kids are getting involved in also. There's so much stuff out there that you need to be we protect our kids, right, in all kinds of physical ways, trying to make sure that, you know, there's not physical abuse from someone, or no, they're not being bullied, or they're getting the good education, all of these things. But what are the things that are going on behind the scenes? And I think that's an important thing that people
Especially
need to pay
now.
attention to.
Especially
Yeah,
now.
especially
There's a
now.
lot of things happening right now that,
Yeah.
that as parents, they need to really look into.
Yeah,
Because your children are being affected by it.
absolutely. From the youngest of ages.
Unfortunately, yeah, from clear down into kindergarten.
Yeah, and not just, and that, I mean, that's part of the Equality Act, but it's the same thing that happened this last year in Washington State, right, with the new Education Act that happened also.
Yeah.
So, and we worked hard to try and get that repealed too, but, yeah, and people didn't understand what that was even,
Yeah.
or thought that maybe the kids in public school could just opt out of it. Well, it's interesting now because kids are opting out of the public schools, what's happening. And, I mean, the school here is full with a wait list in every one of the classrooms because people are, in part at least, trying to get away from some of those things.
But if you're gonna pay attention to anything, this particular one is something you do not want to ignore.
Yeah, the Equality Act.
You wanna look
Yeah.
into what you can do to help stop this,
Yeah.
because it's, as we'll get into, you'll understand why.
Yeah.
It's critical.
Yeah, it really is.
You
It
can't
really
just
is.
wait for somebody else to do it. You need to stand up and do it yourself.
Yeah. Which, as you were talking about last night too, it's about also educating ourselves, right? But using those good sources for education also. I talked about in terms of that society, then I want to get back to my thoughts before we then are just about ready to dive into the Equality Act itself. But the society and the enemy first of God trying to divorce ourselves even from that gift that God has given to ourselves as us, right? Even my body, my soul is being a gift from me with all of the gifts that go along with that. But society again has bought into that, seeking to divorce us even from that. And then we can get into even from that, if you think about that in terms of the church's teaching on mutilation, right? So we're cutting off a part in a mutilation. It's cutting a part of the body or cutting off a part of the body, because usually we would do that obviously if there's a disease that's there. And actually the church speaks very clearly about this, that mutilation actually falls in the category of murder within the 10 Commandments. So it's number 5. It's not at the same level, obviously, of actual murder, but well, here I'll read it.
Destroying somebody's soul.
Well, but it's not mutilation, it's something other than that even. I mean, it's taking a part of us, or partial destruction, right?
Right.
Which is how they talk about it. An action, so mutilation, an action which deprives oneself or another of a bodily organ or its use. Mutilation belongs to the category of murder. The difference is that mutilation is partial destruction, whereas murder is the total destruction of a person's physical life. Moral law is concerned with mutilation because no one has absolute dominion over the body, and the violation of this principle is an offense against God's sovereignty. So we're taking, and I've talked about this, I don't know how many times in the homilies and different things. We're trying to be God, right, and take that sovereignty for ourselves, which is the same thing that Adam and Eve did way back in the beginning, trying to grab at that for themselves, so that I know the difference between right and wrong, and I determine the difference between right and wrong. It's a pride, which is the pride that Adam and Eve first fell into, and we continue to fall into. But God wants to set us free from that also. So what we need to do is to trust that God knows what is best for us, also to trust in Him, including His love for us, in a world where especially we can feel so isolated, and I think especially with someone who struggles with that gender dysphoria, or same-sex attraction, right? There's that feeling of being isolated, cut off, and alone, right? But at one level or another, also, everybody feels that. We don't have as close of relationships necessarily, even as we even see from the outside, right? We can see someone and say, oh, I'm kind of jealous of the relationship that person has with another person, or that person with that person. But oftentimes people aren't as close as we might think. Sometimes they are, obviously, right? And there's great friendships that are built up and established there. But it needs to be even focused in the Lord there too, right?
I think the pandemic made that worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
The technology was one thing, where, like I said, the drive-bys, and you don't have to see people and talk to them. I mean, have a conversation with them anymore. You just blast them with something and just turn around and walk away, and there it is out there.
Right.
In a pandemic, there wasn't the opportunity to get together even. Except through over Zoom or something, but that's not the same.
It's not the same.
It's not the same.
It's
But we're coming out of it, so let's, we need to. That's something we need to get back to do. Is human interaction is what we need to have.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with the Mass too.
Yeah.
Not the same, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
To be online versus in person. I want to read from John chapter 15 then again, and we'll do a couple of scripture passages to close with, and then I'll touch base on something that Pope Francis also said in Amoris Laetitia, which came out in 2016. Amoris Laetitia is the joy of love. That's what it's translated from the Latin to the English, right? So, but John chapter 15, I forgot the verse. There we go. Verses 8 through 12. By this, and I think that I read this over and over again. It's becoming maybe the scripture quote for my priesthood. I don't know, but it seems like that. By this is my Father glorified, that you bear much fruit. God desires for us to bear fruit, first of all. That was the first thing that came into my mind this morning. The gift of the self, and to the self, right, from God to us, of ourselves. And then that gift that it's meant to be to the world is meant to bear fruit in our own lives and in the lives of others. And when we deny that gift, then we deny people also of that gift that God has given to us to be shared, again, not just with ourselves, but with others. So he desires for us to bear fruit. How do we do that? And by becoming my disciples. By this is my Father glorified, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. As the Father loves me, so I also love you. Remain in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy might be in you and your joy might be complete. This is my commandment. Love one another as I love you. There's a sacrifice that's there in that love. That's what God desires also to see even with us. We have to make sacrifices, really, and that's what we've lost in many ways. And that's what Jesus also says, right? If you want to be my disciples, what do we have to do? Deny ourselves, pick up our cross, and follow him.
The last night when I was at the Archdiocese, the
Listening session.
pastoral council listening session, we're going through the 5-year plan and mission statement and thing, and
For the Archdiocese.
For the Archdiocese, yeah. And really the shortened version of the mission statement really kind of summarized it for me, and a lot of people really liked it, was encounter Jesus, become disciples, make disciples.
Yeah.
So and then you can fill in the blanks multiple different ways, depending on what your parish is or what your programs are, but those 3 little sentences there, I think it was a great summary.
And the one thing that I like, that I've heard about, we did a listening session too with priests from the deanery. The one, and I don't know if it's still there because they're adjusting it as they get feedback from people.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I really liked about that was that they're just staying with the mission that Jesus gave us, right?
Right.
So, to go out and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. Yeah, so that's that's the mission that Jesus gave to us. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're just picking up the mission that he's given to us and moving forward with it, which is what we're called to do. Not to change the mission.
Matthew 28.
You know, we follow the Lord, right? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to read what Pope Francis has said, especially about this gender topic, and I talked about this in a homily recently, a few weeks ago also, but and I used part of this quote from Amoris Laetitia that Pope Francis wrote, again, The Joy of Love. He wrote this back in 2016. This comes from paragraph 56, or number 56. Yet another challenge is posed by the various forms of an ideology of gender that denies the difference and reciprocity in nature of a man and a woman, and envisages a society without sexual differences, thereby eliminating the anthropological basis of the family. So it's all about the destruction also of the family, which again is what the enemy of the Lord desires to do, right? The devil, huh? This ideology leads to educational programs and legislative enactments that promote a personal identity and emotional intimacy radically separated from the biological difference between male and female, which is precisely what's going on with the Equality Act.
That's exactly what's going on.
Yep. So they're trying to divorce or separate, again, as he's saying, through education programs and legislative enactments, a personal identity and emotional intimacy that's radically separated from a biological difference. So we have our biological gender that God has given to us, male and female. It's written in our DNA, right, that this is who we are. But people that are trying to choose differently than that. Consequently, human identity, he continues, becomes the choice of the individual, one which can also change over time. It is a source of concern that some ideologies of this sort, which seek to respond to what are at the times understandable aspirations, manage to assert themselves as absolute and unquestionable, even dictating how children should be raised. And we're hearing that now, right? And then how far are we from people saying, well, you're not raising your children in a particular way, right?
They want to take them away.
Then they're going to take them away, yep. it needs to be emphasized that biological sex and the socio-cultural role of sex, gender, can be distinguished but not separated, he says. So biological sex and socio-cultural role of sex, gender, can be distinguished but not separated. We can't separate the physical gender of who we are, right? On the other hand, the technological revolution in the field of human procreation has introduced the ability to manipulate the reproductive act, making it independent of the sexual relationship between a man and a woman. In this way, human life and parenthood have become modular and separable realities, subject mainly to the wishes of individuals or couples. It is one thing to be an understanding of human weakness and the complexities of life, and another to accept ideologies that attempt to sunder what are inseparable aspects of reality. That's a strong quote. I'm going to read that again.
Yep.
Where was it? It is one thing, right? It is one thing to be understanding of human weakness and the complexities of life, so we can understand that people have weaknesses, that people have struggles, that life is complex, right? It's one thing to do that. It's another to accept ideologies that attempt to sunder, to separate what are inseparable aspects of reality. So we can't separate ourselves completely from the identity of who we've created to be, just because we have a weakness or there's a complexity there, even within our own minds. We can't separate those things, right? We can't just buy into an ideology that says that we can do that. Let us not fall into the sin of trying to replace the Creator. We are creatures and not omnipotent. Creation is prior to us and must be received as a gift. It's the same thing that I've been saying, right? At the same time, we are called to protect our humanity, and this means, in the first place, accepting it and respecting it as it was created. It's very strong language from the Pope. Huh?
You know, what's interesting is that all throughout history, the younger generation has always attempted to get a rise out of their parents.
Uh-huh.
And by being rebellious of some one way or the other.
Sure.
And my youngest daughter went to one of the local high schools back in the early 2000s, and she was saying that, you know, being bisexual was cool.
Right.
Everybody was dressing like they're bisexual, acting like they're bisexual. Of course they weren't, but it was, boy, it sure made their parents mad.
Yeah.
You know, so it's becoming, you know, they're pointing to that, so that's a reality. All these people are bisexual. Well, they weren't.
Right.
It was just a fashion statement or something. I don't know what it was, but those people grew up and went off and got married and did whatever they were supposed to be doing. But it's probably not all of them.
Sure.
But some of them. But it's, you know, it just shows that kids will experiment with different things and
Sure.
and not really know what they're doing.
And
Like playing with fire.
Right. But in some ways also it's part of the process of growing up,
It
right?
is.
To identify who we are, to recognize who we are, but we grow into that. And what the transgender ideology is saying is that you don't necessarily need to grow into anything in the moment, and it's even saying that in the Equality Act, in the moment you can change it like that. It's not something that you even have to permanently change. You can shift back and forth or do it in a moment when you feel like it, and other times not. Right, I'm trying to remember the language around that. I should be relating to the document itself. But so let's actually get into the document then also. I have a whole list of things really that are here to talk about in terms of the way that it affects the Equality Act is looking to affect change. So it's going through the 1964 Civil Rights Act,
Yep.
right, and trying to basically change some things around that, change up the language that's there,
Inserting language,
inserting
yeah.
language that is, what is it?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want the quote?
Sure.
Okay.
You can find it.
Yeah. So in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the quote is to allow full and equal enjoyment of any given things, and in place of public accommodations, for example, without, this is the important part, without discrimination or segregation on the grounds of race, color, religion, or national origin.
So that's what the original act
That's the
says.
1964 Civil
Yeah.
Rights Act. What has been all through the document now inserted, or
With the
is being
Equality
proposed
Act,
to be
right.
inserted with the Equality Act, is right between religion and national origin to insert sex, parenthetical, including sexual orientation and gender identity
Throughout the document,
throughout.
Right,
everywhere.
right.
So wherever it would address discrimination or segregation, it's not just color and race, it is now sex, sexual
Or
orientation,
religion, or
gender identity.
Right. So, so it's expanding that, but it's also expanding the list of things under which that, or where that applies, right? So in the past, it was, I think in the original document, the civil rights document, it's the gas stations, theaters, restaurants, hotels, the
Accommodation.
right.
Yeah.
But in this, it's expanding it to other places also to cover any public gatherings, establishment that provides any establishment that provides a good, a service, or a program, hospitals, gyms, shelters, wedding vendors, and even houses of worship where they serve the poor, in particular, might be serving meals, and then funeral homes and many of our private schools. So all of those things, it's seeking to expand its reach, right, into even our religion, right, unto our faith.
In particular, the one, I don't know if you're gonna have any kind of real order to this, but as you were talking about it, was that the churches that serve meals to the poor.
Right.
Means that the churches would have to accommodate same-sex use of their bathrooms,
Right,
which is gonna be common everywhere,
right,
so that, including churches.
yeah. Which, yeah, and it's, I mean, it's already been happening all throughout, right? But now they're trying to, again, reach that influence into even our religious sphere, right? So that freedom of religion that we have enjoyed even because of the Constitution, right? And we talk about the Freedom of Religion Act that was
1993.
1993. That's what I was trying to remember
Yeah.
is the year that it came out. And it actually is trying to supplant that and say that these things, the Religious Act, Religious Restoration Act is what it's called of 1993. Right. Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993. Thank you very much, Mary. That it doesn't apply, right? So that we cannot appeal to that in this case, that the Equality Act supersedes that, right?
So pretty much circumvented the Constitution is what they've done by eliminating the requirement for churches to be exempt from the government control.
Right.
And not just churches too, but like Catholic hospitals, for example, where abortion services could be demanded.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah,
And schools.
that's so again, I'm gonna go through that list actually, and that's the things that it'll affect within the church, and we'll make comments then on different parts of that too. But I think one thing that's important for us in terms of we talked about this in the beginning, the Equality Act is not just really about equality, right? It's some people seeking that equality for themselves, but it's taking away then an equality for everybody else, and especially those who might be coming from a different faith background, right? So anything to do with faith then is unequal and even can be removed and punished, right, for not falling in line in that sense.
Or thinking like this is a thought act too.
Right.
You need to think like what they're telling you to think, and teach your kids to think that way.
Right. And if there's evidence to the contrary, then there's all kinds
Big
of
Brother's going to come and take them away.
Results that can happen from that, consequences, including, I mean, even they're talking about fines, right, for churches.
Oh.
Not just removing of tax exempt status, right, from churches, which would be one thing, but also, what is it? I think up to $500,000 fine or whatever it is that I'd heard for.
It's not just churches; it's companies too.
Right, companies also.
So you have gyms or whatever, or a women's club.
We'll get into that in a
we'll
second.
that.
So so again, it's not just about equality, but it's seeking to reach beyond that. It's seeking so this is what I had written here even, right? It's not just about protecting someone because they're LGBTQ, but taking it much further. It forces others to see and support gender identity that differs from biological sex. So we have to accept that, right? That's what they're trying to impose then across the board, that we have to accept that there's a difference between gender identity, what somebody identifies from, and biological sex. It does not just refer to people with gender dysphoria, but allows anyone to identify in any way at any time. Which, I mean, and that's where we get into the different things where it can be problematic even as we go into a women's shelter, right? So one of the things, so we talk about this affects, or will affect, or could affect, if it's passed, Catholic foster care and adoption centers, shelters, right? So I don't know if you want to touch on that too.
Yeah, no, I can touch on a few things.
Yeah, there's a few
I mean, I
things,
think
right?
it's worth just at least reading from the Act itself. Under definitions and rules, gender identity, the term gender identity means the gender-related identity, appearance, mannerisms, or other gender-related characteristics of an individual, regardless of the individual's designated sex at birth, which is what gets us into the 3 points. So, I mean, really, that woman's identity in and of itself is compromised under this act, because your designated sex has no meaning. That sex at birth has no meaning, and yet we know that's not true, because sex very much has meaning. Our bodies have meaning. Our bodies are created with meaning. A young girl who goes through puberty and is then a woman, I mean, she's menstruating monthly usually, and she is able to become pregnant and have that baby and then nurse that baby. It's like that Jim Gaffigan joke, you know, about like how a woman's body can make a baby and give birth to a baby and feed a baby, and the man's just standing there and going, I helped. But a woman's body does all these things. And so to try to argue that because a man perceives himself to be female or have some female gender-related characteristics, suddenly his body can in any way be equated to that of a female body is
The DNA is not there.
it's a lie on its face, and he would be lying to himself, and it's a lie to women and young girls as well, to not realize that we are women because we are female.
Which there's actually I meant to even touch base on this earlier in the video that we watched for a number of these things also. I mean, there were all kinds of things that we took into study for this this morning, but they referred to a quote from Martin Luther King, right? I mean, you're talking about there's a lie that's even there with identifying where our bodies are, what our bodies are, and Martin Luther King speaks about human law, and it's not a just law unless it's based on natural law and the divine law. Right, so he was quoting that from prison.
Right, there's Thomas Aquinas too.
Right, which is St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine also.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Right. So again, natural law, which I've been talking about in our basic moral principles, also is just being able to even philosophically, really, in many ways, look out on the world and see how things are meant to work, right? And really, in a sense, we're kind of taking reason and saying, nope, that's out of the way, and we're taking science even and saying, nope, that's out of the way, because we're now denying even what science says.
Which is weird, because on the one hand it's saying that there is no legal distinction between men and women, and that in fact there's just no distinction between the sexes, and yet you have to address the concept of a man, for example, who perceives himself to be a woman. Well, what is he basing that perception on? Something.
Right.
There has to be a difference, or else it wouldn't matter.
Right.
He wouldn't want to become a woman if there wasn't a distinct difference between the two in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's
the law itself
contradictory in
itself,
yes,
even
exactly.
in the Equality Act
so
itself. Yeah.
You kind of run into that, but that's just a circle that you just go round and round, and you
Right.
drive yourself insane trying to keep track of that.
I didn't mean to break into your points
No,
that you're
but
making,
but it is. I mean, that's the number one thing, is that it just eliminates woman's autonomy and identity. And the other thing too, just kind of going back to, as you know, Catholics and Christians, we as women also identify as daughters of Christ, and men as sons of Christ and sons of the Father. And I think that, you know, for anybody who especially has a decent relationship with their parents knows that there's a huge difference between a son-father relationship and a daughter-father relationship. And so spiritually too, there's kind of a crumbling of the relationship between spiritual parent and child there too. Yeah, the other thing that I think has gotten a lot more conversation over the years has been the loss of opportunities that this would mean for females, specifically in athletics. And this has been kind of a major debate going on for a long time. And I was just reading this morning, you know, I guess the World Athletic Olympic, whatever you call that commission, the rule right now is that a man would have to be on hormone therapy for 1 year prior to competing in women's athletics. However, surprise, surprise, that has no bearing on the man's ability to still dominate women's athletics. I mean, sit-ups, push-ups, speed, all of it. There's not, yes, all of it. There's just no comparison on a general basis. Obviously, there's exceptions to every rule. Everybody knows that. Well, just like going back to the other thing too. I mean, it's not as though every man out there is equally masculine. Some men have feminine tendencies. Plenty of women have masculine tendencies. But we identify those as such, based on the difference again, right?
Between the sexes.
So
and the complementarity of the sexes, which is what again John Paul II.
So you give men like this venue to come literally racing into women's athletics and completely dominate the field. We've got records that are being crushed that were previously set by biological females that are now being crushed by biological males who are identifying as transgender females. So what is there, you know, and how are you going to even determine?
Scholarships.
Yeah, well, and that's the other big one is scholarships that are available to female athletes who now are competing with biologically male athletes, where they don't really stand a chance. There's also academic opportunities, scholarship related to that are sex specific or previously were sex specific. You know, and then even things like that we think about historically, you know, the first female astronaut or the first female vice president. What does it matter if the female male, so I mean, all of those are kind of big ones. And then
it's interesting too, I mean, so even in terms of Catholic schools, right? So if a Catholic school receives any kind of government funding, which we do even for usually Catholic schools do even for a lunch program for their kids, the parents are still paying taxes, right? Parents and this is something that people often don't know about Catholic schools either, parents not only pay taxes, right? So that they're paying actually for public education, because those taxes go towards public education, but they're also paying for their kids' private education, tuition, right? So they're paying both of those aspects, and yet then because the government does help with people who may struggle a little bit more with a food program, then if a school accepts that, and it gets worse in universities in terms of student aid, right, that a student needs to receive in order to go to a private college, if the private college then has all kinds of pressure to continue receiving that aid, but if they do so, then they would have to in some ways cease being Catholic also, right? They have a choice to make. Either they follow what the government is saying, or they close their school doors, right? Because they don't have the same resources. And so the other piece of that is that even if you do in a grade school, let's say, you don't have that any kind of government funding even for a lunch program, which isn't very much money in the grand scheme of things in running a school. But if you don't have that, your kids in a grade school or even in high school or in college are still going to be competing against other schools who do have males who are identifying as females playing on those sports, on those teams. Yep, and you have to accept that.
You know, Mary, would you say it's a fair statement that just a cursory review of that 32-page document, would you say that women and girls are the biggest losers?
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
by a long shot, aren't they? I asked my wife,
It's
and I were talking about it
predatory.
this morning, and she says, well, I don't know what we're supposed to do. And I said, fight back. And she says, how do I do that? And I said, women are probably the 99% of the shoppers in this world. And if they decide that,
Well, that's sexist.
I meant that as a compliment because she takes care of me. You know? But yeah, because I can't do it myself. No, I didn't mean it that way. But but I mean, if you really wanted to use the hammer of economics, you could say, you know what, if you're going to promote this stuff, we're not going to support you. And just start, you know, they're telling you what you're going to do, and just say, well, no, we're not. We're not going to do it. So it's you know, and that's a huge hammer, big hammer that women could use.
Well, and that's actually the document, as you go through the Equality Act, one of the main reasons why that they constantly refer to, right, is that all of these, what they're saying is sort of discrimination, right, is interfering with the economy, right? So they're referring to that time and time again. It's all about, and that's how they're sort of getting their end, it seems, or one of the things that they're pushing is that it interferes with the economic commerce, they say. So
Yeah.
I don't know how, but it does. I think it's very serious.
go ahead, Barry. What?
Y'all are mansplaining.
Y'all. Y'all.
Go ahead, Barry.
No, the one that came as the biggest shock to me, I think, reading through this and hearing about it back in February when it was passed, is that public accommodations section, which Father already read from, but in the document itself, it's any establishment that provides a goods, service, program, including a store, a shopping center, online retailer, service provider, salon, bank, gas station, food bank, service or care center, shelter, travel agency, funeral parlor, establishment that provides healthcare, accounting, or legal services, among several others. And the one that jumped out to me the most by far was the shelter idea, and the idea that a woman's shelter can no longer be a woman's shelter, and that you've got, you think about sort of the major uses for women's shelter is usually escaping a dangerous situation, which is usually related to domestic violence or sex trafficking, sex abuse. I mean, and in any of those situations, it is no longer a safe space for biological females to be there for each other in a safe place to sleep even through the night, without being exposed to potentially greater trauma or having their trauma exploited. And that's just a horrifying concept. So that was a big one for me that really jumped out. But also the idea too of close contact jobs, where again, if you're not distinguishing, and if you can have a biological male be interacting in close contact with females, again, like in a hospital situation for a woman that might be in there have a rape kit done because she's just been raped, and now you can have, without the survivor being able to speak up for herself, have biological males coming in to do the pelvic exam or any other components of the rape kit. So hospitals are a big one. TSA was one of the examples from last night. Where like pat down TSA sometimes, yeah. So pat down security searches, at the airport. Now, when you go through and you set off the metal detector, which I always do, now you normally will be assigned a female, TSA agent who will be there to make sure you're not bringing anything bad.
In the future, though, if this is passed,
all bets are off.
Yeah.
And then the one that also from last night came up in the video, but you mentioned too, is prisons and women who are incarcerated and their safety as well.
Who was it? Somebody was saying that some guys have already picked up on that.
Mary Hassan,
she
Washington
mentioned that.
D.C. She mentioned that some people, the prisoners in Washington State,
here in Washington State,
have already picked up on the fact that they can claim that they're women
and be moved to a women's prison.
And be requested transfer to women's prison.
Yeah.
Now, so far, since this has not been enacted, I don't think that's being done here. but it's coming. It's already, they passed something similar to that in Anchorage. Remember
Well, and
that?
again, you've got the language, I mean, it may sound like we're all like making a huge production or big deal out of nothing, or we're all being paranoid, but the reality is the language in the bill itself does absolutely allow for
Right.
indiscriminate decisions of
Right.
sex change whenever. There's no language that says it's a permanent decision. There's no language that says it has to be done after or before a certain age. It's whenever,
It's up to the
wherever.
person making the claim.
In the
Yeah.
moment. So
That's-
that's what
that's
it.
it.
And you
it
can't
says-
question it either.
Yeah.
It does not just refer to people with gender dysphoria, I read this earlier also, but it's a re-emphasis, but allows anyone to identify in any way
Yeah.
at any time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what the whole gender identity definition
And they have to be
is.
accommodated,
Yeah.
based on whatever they happen to say that they are.
Right.
Like the prisoners, the sex offender prisoners is claiming
Right,
they're,
well,
they're
but,
women.
but even that, in that case, then, you have, let's say, and I mean, these situations do happen, it's a more rare thing, but it does happen, and could it happen even more frequently now, right, if this is passed? And as you're saying, people may say, well, you may sound paranoid, but we're just looking at what's the reality of what is this
Yeah.
effect, right?
And
What
it's
are the
the language
consequences
of-
that
yeah.
come down the line? But one of those things could be, you have a guy who's going in to be peeping Tom in a women's bathroom, and somebody catches him and says, you can't be in here doing this. And he says, well, I identify, I mean, it's in the moment, in any way, at any time, I identify as a woman.
You can sue 'em.
Right, you could sue him. And that's one of the big things also, right, is the lawsuits that would come from this also against the church for being discriminatory or against companies as individuals.
Which is really my only follow-up to your comment about the shopping and supporting, like, I don't know how you determine which businesses to support and not support if it's a federal,
Right.
law.
No, I'm just saying. it's
I mean, it sounds like a good idea, but it's, the
If
language
it's
is all
being
in there.
blanketed across the
Online reach, I
board,
mean,
yeah.
Amazon is already determining what books can be sold and not.
Yeah. The thing that we have, I mean, I think we can get sort of overwhelmed in this. So first of all, to remember it hasn't been passed yet, but that's part of our responsibility then to make sure that, we're doing all that we can so that we're encouraging our senators to vote against this also. But we also have another recourse that's there, right? Because it does violate our constitutional rights as religious groups also. So if they seek to come in and try to control some of these aspects, then we can't fight against that. I mean, but it makes us going to something like ultimately even the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And so we do have recourse there through the Supreme Court and the Constitution, but there's even references to things within the document that's trying to rebut some of those things even in advance,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You can't
Yeah.
appeal it. That's
Yeah.
that's one of the things you're saying in there. But it's and again, going back to what we talked about earlier, that a lot of people think this is scare tactics, but these things are a reality that's in this bill.
Yeah.
And some of our own senators are saying, well, you can't. Most of this will never be enforced. That's not the point. The point is it will
Yeah.
be law. So anybody who wants to enforce it can enforce
Right.
it. That's the whole point.
Or if anybody wants to just sue, they're angry and yeah.
Well,
So-
we touched on the implications for women, but there's
There's a
also
lot
the
of
whole
other
issue of
things.
children
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
puberty blockers and the age at which children apparently get to make
Sure.
decisions about that sort of stuff.
And there's all kinds of things that talk about that also, and I didn't do enough study in this, so I don't have numbers for it necessarily, but it talks in the video that we were talking or listening to also, it talked about how kids can have sort of this struggle for a moment, but then they can also grow out of that, right? So that as they get older, then they realize they come to terms with who they are also, right? But in the case where then you're already starting because someone's had this idea at the moment, they maybe go to their parents and talk to them about it, and then all of a sudden they're starting this hormone therapy, right? Starting all kinds of things, and then it's,
Well, once they're on puberty blockers, they don't have a chance.
right.
One of the things they used as an example was a young girl in the UK who was 16 years old and demanded that she get puberty blockers, and she did. And then when she was 18 years old, she had a double mastectomy. By the time she was 21, she realized she was a woman with a beard.
Yeah.
She never was happy. never became the man that she thought she was going to be.
Yeah.
But at the time, she wished she never would have done any of that.
Yeah.
So it's, there's a certain amount of mental health counseling that needs to be done. You can't just say, just because someone demands it, but this bill is saying if they demand it, they get it.
Right. And that's why the church speaks about that gender dysphoria too, right? So we're called to meet people where they are and help them, right? It's not about hatred, it's about loving them and about an authentic love that brings them to a place.
Help them.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Well, and it doesn't matter to what degree you mutilate yourself. I mean, it does matter, but
Right.
it'll always be the appearance of the thing and not actually be the thing.
reality.
You can't
Yeah.
change
Just-
the DNA.
Which is why I think that they hone in on appearance and mannerisms in their definition, because even the writers of this bill know that it's not going to be an actual conversion from male to female. That's not happening.
Right.
Or vice versa.
Yeah. Again, the DNA is always going to be there. We
Mhm.
can't change the DNA of who we are. So, I mean, we've talked about this too, but I think just to go through the list again too of things that are affected by it. So, Catholic foster care and adoption centers, which would force Catholic adoption agencies, for example, or foster care centers to place kids with same-sex couples, violating a child's right even to have a mother and a father, right? So that would be shut down. The shelters we talked about, support for women's groups. She also spoke about
Survivor support groups.
right, survivor support groups. That could be shifted. Halls attached to houses of worship. So if you rent out the hall in the school, for example, and we're a parish and a school, if you rent out the hall to people even within the parish, then you would also have to do it. Or if you hold a public event on campus, then you, in terms of open to the public exteriorly, then you would also have to open that to whoever might come to you, even though if it's something like a same-sex union or a same-sex wedding, you would have to, according to the Equality Act, you would have to open your church to that, not just the hall, but it could even be the church itself, right? So there's a lot of things even there. Then you could be sued again if you refuse to allow that to happen, right? And then healthcare system. So it also speaks in there about when it talks about sex, it's talking about also abortion, right? And so doctors who are Catholic or work in a Catholic hospital even, right? So healthcare, they would have to perform an abortion or be open to being sued, or would have to also perform gender transition procedures.
Or be fired.
Or be fired or
Yeah.
sued, right?
Both.
Yeah,
Yeah.
both. Yeah. Lose their
First
livelihood.
one, then the
But it
other.
isn't just Catholic doctors, it's any
No, right,
anybody
absolutely.
that consciously objects to
Right,
this
right.
could be, open themselves up to a lawsuit,
Right,
because they're not thinking correctly.
right. Yeah, that's what they would say.
It's
right,
re-education
they're not
center is
thinking.
what
Yeah,
it amounts to.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And then counselors also would have to affirm transition rather than acceptance of one's body. So if someone comes to you and they're wanting this, then a counselor has to do that also, which is what the Equality Act would say.
Or the parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they actually talked about in the video, they said there are 5 Catholic health entities that are already caught up in lawsuits under similar laws in some places, right? So that's even before the Equality Act has come about, but then we have the Equality Act.
You know, I guess, maybe we're kind of, because we're Catholics, we're singling that out.
Sure.
But in reality, the Catholic Church, behind the federal government, is the largest single charitable service organization on the planet.
Yeah.
So it's not like, this isn't important, because if
Serves
all of a
millions
sudden
and
this starts
millions.
being lawsuits and all these things start to contract, who's gonna lose here?
Right.
All the people that need help are the
Right.
ones that are gonna lose,
Right.
because the government certainly can't pick all this up.
Right.
They need other church organizations, or NGOs, I guess, and non-government organizations to pick up this tab and help people.
Yeah.
And the Catholic Church doesn't turn anyone away.
Right. Yeah.
There's certain things we won't do because it violates the faith, but there's, I mean, they don't
But
care
you
if you're
minister care
LGBTQ and you come in and you need a counseling center or you need help for.
Right, whatever it might be.
Yeah, you know, have a medical problem or you have an abuse problem or something, you know, that you need someplace to go.
Or you need food, or you need any kind of service, right? Any kind of
Any kind of
financial
service.
assistance that you
Really.
might be coming to the church for also. And
Yeah.
so all of those things, ultimately, again, it forces the church into a difficult situation also. So do these institutions then, like Catholic Community Services, like Catholic Relief Services, Catholic Community Services, helping communities locally through struggling times, right, with things like shelters and food and all of these things. And then Catholic Relief Services, things that help people internationally even, and hospitals, Catholic hospitals, right, Catholic universities would also be affected, as we've talked about. Not just in terms of not receiving, or students not being able to receive any kind of federal aid with those, and then the university loses out on those resources. But again, sports teams and locker rooms and dorms.
It does affect all those Catholic organizations you're talking about.
Right, but it's more
on
than
a
that.
bigger picture, you're talking about a huge societal issue.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about a major societal issue. These people can't get help. What do you suppose is going to happen to the fabric of our society?
Yeah.
That's worries me too.
Right.
We think this is bad. Wait till we can't, you know, we've got homeless on the streets as it is,
Oh, yeah.
and lawlessness everywhere, so I can't
It's just
imagine
gonna increase.
and these people have nowhere to go to get help now.
Right.
They'll just be walking around like zombies.
Right. Yeah, and he's not even, you're not
I
even
call that
making
friendly.
reference to the people who struggle with gender dysphoria or same-sex attraction. It's
Yeah.
people in general, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, society in general.
You know. Heavy stuff, right?
I'm sick.
And you didn't eat the donut.
I knew I should have brought my Tums.
You know, it's heavy. It's heavy for us.
Oh,
Yeah.
And it's something that obviously is heavy for people who struggle with same-sex attraction, who struggle with gender dysphoria. And we have people within our own community who have struggled with those things, right? And trying to reach out to them in love also and help them to recognize again the gift that God has for them, right? And to realize that gift, to recognize that gift, and to live into it is something that could be incredible, and just even setting people free. But we're turning away from that too, and we already have been. And to be honest, there are plenty of places out there, even not just Christian churches, but even some Catholic churches, who would buy into this wholeheartedly, right?
Yeah.
Into the Equality Act, and there are. I've seen different things put out by different resources that are out there that call themselves Catholic but aren't necessarily Catholic, right? And so I could easily see, and I know this is taking a big step here, right? But I could see that where there are even parishes, for example, within the archdiocese who would be more along the line of almost a state-run parish, right? Versus a Catholic parish that is saying, no, we're going to follow in fullness the teachings of the truth of the church, right?
Put the Queen in charge of the church.
Yeah. Well, there is a
What
queen in
could
charge
go
of the
wrong?
church, the Lord,
Yeah,
the
that's
Blessed
true.
Mother.
Not that one. I was thinking, yes, I know. Well, one thing, and I'm going to tell our viewers here this too, is that as we have been going through this for the last week, and I'm sure you may be feeling some of this now, and maybe we've just a little bit a bigger advantage than you, is that we've had a couple of days to swallow this and realize how we're going to have to present this and how we're have to react, and don't want to belittle the fact that we're angry too, but we're trying to relay it to you so that in a way that you can use this information and maybe make it holy anger, I think,
Right.
maybe, and then don't just be angry
Absolutely.
but you know that there's a cause here, there's a purpose here, and it's helping other people. So you know, I encourage you to educate yourselves, find out where you go to protest this, I guess, to our local senators, I
Yeah,
suppose, at
especially
this
to
point.
start there, yeah.
But do it soon. Do it very soon.
Yeah,
And
because
tell your
the-
friends.
I think it's okay to be angry, yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
and
well,
there's
I
a
mean,
difference.
Christ had some things to say about people who lead children astray.
That's
so.
true, yeah.
That's
yeah.
exactly it. But I
Absolutely.
mean, like I said, it's a,
And it's
we're
a
just-
righteous anger, right? So
It is.
but
Yeah.
that, as Dale was saying, and I think you said that very well, Dale, it has to be purified.
Yeah.
Right, so if there's an anger that's there, God's given us even the emotion of anger, but to make sure that it's a purified, righteous anger, right? Because God is offended. So when God is offended and we react, that's when there's righteous anger. When you or I might be offended by something that someone does, that's not necessarily
No.
righteous anger at all.
Unless it's death.
Oh man, oh man.
That's righteous
You wearing the
anger.
wig?
Get to stick the chicken on you.
Sick the chicken. We could use it. I said that.
My
I said
emotional
that last
support
night.
chicken.
Yeah, I was gonna go home and eat a tub of ice cream, but I can't do that on accident. I didn't have any
8
ice
more
cream
days.
anyway. Yeah.
I
8
have
more
a whole
days.
ton of it in the freezer at home.
Do you?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, well, look at
I'm
that.
not eating that either. I'm
Good.
not eating sugar, so
Yeah.
until another week.
Another week. Easter,
There you go.
Hope.
After that.
resurrection, new life, right? And that's ultimately, again, what God desires for everyone. And again, He gives that to us through the gifts that He's given to us in our lives, receiving those as the gifts that they are, but using them in accordance with the commandments that He's given to us, the law of love, right, which is how we remain in His love, by following His commandments, He said to us, so that His joy might be in us and our joy might be complete.
But this is good timing for this, though, as Easter week being next week, that we're all going to be carrying our crosses.
Yeah.
And we are
Holy
going to be
week.
carrying our crosses, so it's throughout this whole thing. So we need to be able to embrace it and
Embrace
say,
that
you know
cross.
what, we're the ones that have to take care of this. We have to pick up our cross and do something about
Do our
this.
part.
It is,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, Father, I think we bored everybody to death.
I don't think it's been a boring topic, that's
I don't
for
know.
sure. It's a difficult topic, and I
Are the phones ringing off the hook over there?
I have messages that have been coming in, just sort of encouraging along the way.
No donations?
Oh, that's a good idea.
Pick up the phone, Mary. Hello.
We have a telethon going on in the background.
Need a coffee and donut fund.
Yeah, we do need a coffee and donut fund because my coffee is empty and it's been empty the whole time.
Well, mine's empty now, but it's not had been
Yeah,
empty.
that's the Gibbs coffee.
Yeah.
It's never anything in the cup, he just drinks it.
Well, I move we adjourn, Father.
Yeah, let's close with prayer again, and in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Lord, help us to grow in our love for one another, and our authentic love for one another, helping people to recognize, again, the gifts that you have given to each one of us, and our ability to live into those gifts with the help of your grace, to deny ourselves, to pick up our cross, and to follow after you, so that we might live fully into those gifts that you desire for us to live into, that our joy again might be complete through you who is within us. We ask for healing for ourselves, for the people of our parish, for our city, our state, our country, and our world, Lord. And all that we face and all of the struggles that are there in our world today, Lord, that you may place your healing hand upon us, because, Lord, at this point, really and truly, only you can correct all that is going on in the brokenness of our world. Only you can heal us and restore us to the fullness of that goodness and love and respect and dignity and honor that you desire for each of us. Place your healing hand upon, in a special way, Lord, anyone who is struggling with these issues, wrestling with these issues in terms of gender dysphoria or same-sex attraction. Give them a sense of your grace, a sense of your peace, even as they make that sacrifice. of themselves, taking on that cross and following you. We ask all this through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Are you gonna
Yeah,
show?
oh yeah. We don't have a camera
We don't
person.
have our production crew, they don't
Yeah.
work.
The camera person needs to get up there.